4 bolts. Not a bomb, not a broken engine, not sabotage. 4 bolts about the size of your finger that were supposed to hold a door in place on a passenger jet. On January 5th, 2024, that door tore off a nearly new Boeing 737 at 16,000 feet over Oregon. And when investigators went looking for the bolts that should have held it shut, they found something stranger than failure. The bolts weren't broken. They were never there. Now here's the part I want you to sit with. Your first instinct, my first instinct too, is to ask who screwed up. Which worker? Which bad apple? But that's the wrong question. And the fact that it's the wrong question is the whole story. Because those 4 missing bolts weren't an accident. They were a message. And some people inside this company had been trying to send that message for years. One of them until the day he died. Let me show you what they knew. Let's go back to that plane. Alaska Airlines Flight 1282, a Boeing 737 MAX 9. So new it still had that new aircraft smell. 171 passengers. 6 minutes after takeoff, climbing through 16,000 feet. There's a bang, and suddenly there's a hole in the side of the aeroplane, the size of a refrigerator. Wind screaming, phones ripped out of hands and sucked into the night. A boy's shirt torn clean off his body, oxygen masks dropping. And here is the only reason you're not reading about a mass grave. The plane was still low. Nobody had unbuckled yet. The 2 seats right next to that hole happened to be empty. If that door had blown at cruising altitude, with the cabin full and people walking to the bathroom, we would be telling a very different story. The people on that flight didn't survive because Boeing was careful. They survived because of where the sky decided to open. The plane lands, everyone lives. And now the investigators come in. The NTSB, the people whose entire job is to find out why. What they found should have been simple. It wasn't. The door that blew off wasn't really a door. It was a plug, a panel that fills a hole where an emergency exit could go, but doesn't. It's held in place by 4 bolts. And months earlier, back at Boeing's factory in Renton, Washington, that plug had been opened so workers could fix and damage rivets nearby. To open it, you take the bolts out. When you're done, you put them back. The bolts never went back. No one wrote it down. There was no paperwork, no record that the plug was ever opened, and so no record that anyone needed to close it again. The plane simply rolled down the line, got painted, got delivered, and flew for weeks, with nothing but friction and luck holding that panel to the fuselage, until the luck ran out over Oregon. Now stay with me, because this is the moment everything turns. The easy story is the one your gut wants. Some tired worker forgot the bolts. Fire him. Problem solved. And believe me, there are 100 videos that end right there. But the NTSB didn't blame a worker. Read their final report. They blamed Boeing's failure to provide adequate training, guidance, and oversight. And then came the detail I can't get out of my head. On the team responsible for that door plug, out of 24 workers, only 1 had been trained to remove it. 1. Think about what that means. The missing bolts weren't the mistake of a bad person. They were the inevitable output of a place where the people building your airplane hadn't been taught how to build your airplane. You don't fix that by firing a guy. That guy was set up to fail the day he clocked in. And here's what turns my stomach about it. None of this was a surprise. Not to the people inside. There was a man named John Barnett. For 32 years he worked for Boeing, a quality manager, one of the people whose actual job was to catch exactly this kind of thing before it flew. And for years, before any of us had ever heard the word MCAS, Barnett had been saying out loud, on the record, that the factory had stopped caring. He found metal shavings sitting near flight control wiring, the kind of shard that can slice through a wire that steers the plane. He found oxygen systems that he said wouldn't work when passengers actually needed them. He said he watched the company push airplanes out the door faster than they could safely be built, and punish the people who tried to slow it down. They didn't listen to him. They sidelined him. And in March of 2024, just weeks after that door blew off over Oregon, while he was in the middle of giving legal testimony against the company, John Barnett was found dead in his truck. The coroner ruled it a suicide during what they described as a period of deep personal distress. He was 62 years old. I'm not going to tell you what to make of that. I'm going to tell you what he said, because he said it while he was alive, and it's on the record. He was asked, plainly, whether he would fly on one of the planes he'd watched being built. And this is a man who gave 3 decades of his life to Boeing. His answer was, no. So the question quietly changes shape. It stops being, who forgot the bolts? And becomes something much colder. Why was a company that once represented American engineering at its absolute peak now a place where the man hired to protect you wouldn't get on the plane? Boeing didn't forget how to build airplanes overnight. Something was done to it, slowly, deliberately, by people in suits who never touched a wrench, and who, in their own minds, were doing everything right. To find them, we have to leave the factory floor. We have to go back. Not to 2024, further, to a merger almost nobody outside the industry remembers, where the smaller, weaker company quietly swallowed the soul of the giant. That's where the bolts really went missing. 27 years before that door ever opened. To understand what happened to Boeing, you have to understand what Boeing was. Because a man like John Barnett didn't give 32 years to a company he hated. He gave them to a company he believed in. And to understand why he stopped believing, you have to see what it used to be. For most of the 20th century, this was not a normal company. It was run by engineers, for engineers. The people at the top had spent their whole lives around airplanes. They thought in decades, not quarters. And there was an unwritten rule everyone inside just understood. You build the best airplane you possibly can, and the money follows, not the other way around. There's a story people at Boeing used to tell. When they built the 747, the jumbo jet, the plane that defined air travel for a generation, they very nearly bankrupted the whole company to do it. They bet everything, because that's who they were. They were the people who bet the company on being great. And it worked. For 50 years, Boeing was the gold standard. When you stepped onto a Boeing, you were stepping onto the safest, most advanced machine human beings knew how to build. That reputation wasn't marketing. It was earned, one airplane at a time, by people like Barnett, people who cared more about the wing than the stock price. Now hold that picture in your mind, because in 1997, it quietly died. That year,
Boeing bought a rival called McDonnell Douglas. On paper, it looked like a triumph, the strong company absorbing the weak. McDonnell Douglas was struggling. Its commercial airplane business was fading. Boeing was the giant. Boeing was buying. But something strange happened after the deal closed. The people from the losing company ended up running the winning one. McDonnell Douglas's executives moved into the top seats, and they brought a completely different religion with them. There's a line people inside Boeing started saying afterward, bitter and quiet. They said, McDonnell Douglas bought Boeing with Boeing's money. Sit with that. The company that was dying didn't just get absorbed. It reached up from inside the deal and took the controls. And the men now holding those controls did not think like engineers. They thought like financiers. They'd come up in the world of Jack Welch, the famous General Electric boss who taught a whole generation of executives that a company doesn't exist to build things. A company exists to produce one thing above all else: shareholder value, a rising stock price. Money returned to the people who own the shares as fast as possible. One of them didn't even hide it. He told his people, and I'm giving you the meaning of his words, stop behaving like a family and start behaving like a team. On the surface, that sounds harmless, corporate, almost motivational. But listen to what's underneath. A family protects its own, even when it's expensive. A family carries people. A team cuts the ones who don't produce. He was telling a company built on loyalty and craft that those things were now weaknesses. And then they did something almost poetic in how cold it was. In 2001, Boeing moved its headquarters out of Seattle, away from the factories, away from the engineers, away from the actual airplanes, and moved the executives to Chicago, 2,000 miles from the wing. They said it was about being closer to the financial world, and that was exactly the point. The people making the biggest decisions about the airplane no longer had to look at the airplane. They no longer had to walk past the person building it. They could sit in a glass tower in another city and manage Boeing as a number on a screen. An analyst put it perfectly. He said, imagine deciding to move your headquarters somewhere completely disconnected from your business and your customers, and then asking, what could possibly go wrong? Here's what I need you to understand, because this is the heart of it. Nobody in that Chicago tower was evil. Nobody wanted a plane to fall. These were intelligent, respected men doing exactly what business schools had trained them to do: maximize returns, cut costs, reward the shareholder. Every decision on its own looked responsible. That's the trap. That's what makes this story different from every villain story you've ever heard. There was no villain. There was a system. And the system had decided, without anyone ever saying it out loud, that the airplane was no longer the point. The money was the point. The airplane was just how you got it. And once that becomes true inside a company that builds flying machines full of human beings, it is only a matter of time before the two things that used to be the same start to pull apart: safety and profit. For a while, you can pretend they still point in the same direction. For a while. That's what men like Barnett were watching happen from the inside, with no power to stop it.
Here's where the two lines, safety and profit, finally tear apart. And here's where you find out what the men in the glass tower did with all that money. Between 2013 and 2019, Boeing spent $43 billion buying back its own stock. Let me explain what that means in plain language, because it sounds like accounting, and it's actually the whole crime. The whole crime is that Boeing spent $43 billion buying back its own stock. Let me explain what that means in plain language, because it sounds like accounting, and it's actually the whole crime. 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 And it's actually the
When a company buys back its own shares, it spends its cash to shrink the number of shares that exist. Fewer shares means each remaining one is worth more. The stock price goes up. The shareholders get richer. The executives, whose pay is tied to that stock price, get much richer. Nothing is built, nothing is invented, no factory is improved, no worker is trained. It is purely money moving upward. $43 billion, more than the company earned in those years. Enough, many times over, to design an entirely new airplane from a clean sheet of paper. A safe one, a modern one. They chose the buybacks. So when Airbus, their European rival, rolled out a new fuel-efficient jet and started stealing Boeing's customers, Boeing faced a decision. Build a new plane, the right way, the expensive way, the way the old Boeing would have. Or find a shortcut. They took the shortcut. They took the 737, a design from the 1960s, and strapped bigger, heavier engines onto it. Engines the original frame was never built to carry. And those engines, mounted where they had to be mounted, changed how the airplane behaved in the air. Under certain conditions, the nose wanted to pitch up toward a stall. Now, the honest fix, the engineering fix, would have been to redesign the plane, or at the very least, retrain every pilot on how this new machine actually flew. But retraining pilots costs airlines money. And if Boeing's plane required expensive new training, airlines might just buy the Airbus instead. So the selling point of the entire airplane became, you don't need to retrain anyone. It flies just like the old one. Except it didn't. So to make it behave like the old one, Boeing added a piece of software. A silent system that would automatically shove the nose back down when it sensed trouble. They called it MCAS. And here is the detail that should stop your breath. They didn't tell the pilots it existed. The men flying the airplane, the ones with hundreds of lives behind them, were never told that a hidden system could seize the controls and push the nose toward the ground. Worse, that system relied on a single sensor. One. A single point of failure on a machine carrying 200 souls. If that one sensor lied, the software would obey the lie. On October 29, 2018, a sensor lied. Lion Air Flight 610. The system pushed the nose down. The pilots, who didn't know it existed, pulled back up. It pushed down again. They pulled up. More than 20 times, this silent tug of war, a machine fighting the men trying to save it, until the airplane won and drove 189 people into the Java Sea. And Boeing's response to that first crash is the thing I need you to remember. They did not ground the plane. They pointed at the pilots. Foreign pilots, not properly trained. The planes kept flying. 5 months later, on March 10, 2019, it happened again. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. Same aircraft, same silent system, same nightmare. The nose driving down against everything the crew could do. 157 more people, gone in 6 minutes. 346 human beings, total.
And when investigators finally got inside Boeing's own internal messages, they found the employees had known. One wrote that the airplane was designed by clowns, who are in turn supervised by monkeys. Another wrote a sentence I can't shake. He asked, "Would you put your own family on a plane trained the way we're training people on this one?" And then answered himself, "I wouldn't." Do you hear that? That's the same sentence John Barnett gave about the 787. Different plane, different factory, different man, who never met the one who typed those words. And they arrived, alone, at the exact same answer. No, I wouldn't put my family on it. When two people who don't know each other inside the same company quietly reach the same verdict about the thing they build, that's not a coincidence. That's a confession. It's the machine telling on itself. This is what the $43 billion really bought. Not just a higher stock price. It bought a culture where a known, deadly flaw became a line item. A risk to be managed, priced, and flown. The old Boeing bet the company to be great. The new Boeing bet 346 lives to protect a margin. That is the moment the reckoning became inevitable. But here's what almost no one tells you about what came next. The reckoning came. The lawsuits came. The losses came. Tens of billions of them. By every rule of how capitalism is supposed to work, this company should have been punished into the ground. It wasn't. It couldn't be. And why it couldn't be is the part of this story that should genuinely unsettle you. So the punishment came. And on paper, it was enormous. 6 straight years of losses. More than $36 billion. Gone. The stock, which had peaked at over $440 a share just days before the second crash, collapsed. A criminal charge from the Justice Department, settlements, fines, public hearings where executives sat and apologized to the families of the dead. On camera, under oath. By every rule they teach you about how markets work, this should have been the end. In a real free market, a company that kills its customers and forgets the bolts on its airplanes gets destroyed. Something better takes its place. That is the whole promise of the system. That failure is fatal. That gravity applies to everyone. Except Boeing didn't fall. And the reason why is the thing this entire story has been walking toward from the very first bolt. Let me ask you something. If you ran the United States government and Boeing came to you broken, could you actually let it die? Before you answer, look at what you'd be turning off. Start with the obvious one. Air Force One. The airplane that carries the President of the United States. That is a Boeing. The single most recognizable symbol of American power on Earth is a plane this company builds. Now keep going. The bombers, the fighter jets, the refueling tankers that let American aircraft cross oceans without landing. Much of the machinery of American air power doesn't just involve Boeing. It is Boeing. Now go wider. This is one of the largest exporters in the entire American economy. Hundreds of thousands of jobs,
spread across dozens of states, hang off this one company. The workers, and then the suppliers who feed the workers, and then the towns built around the suppliers. Pull Boeing out, and you don't remove a company. You tear a hole through the industrial spine of the country, through the military, through the economy, all at once. So could you let it die? You couldn't. No president could. And that's the trap. Because Boeing knows it too. That is the darkest turn in this whole story. Somewhere along the way, without anyone ever announcing it, Boeing stopped being a company that had to survive by being good, and became a company that would be caught no matter how badly it fell. It grew so entangled with the power of the United States that the country could no longer afford to let it face the one thing that keeps everyone else honest. The consequence. The drop. And there is nothing more dangerous than an institution that has quietly learned it cannot be allowed to fail. Now, let me pause for 1 second, because if you're still with me this far in, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is built for. Someone who wants to see the machinery under the story they were handed. If that's you, take a breath and subscribe. Come sit with us. We do this every day. We take the names you were taught to trust, and we show you what's actually holding them up. That's the whole reason we're here. And what's holding this one up? That's the part that goes so much bigger than a single plane maker. Because once you see this shape, the institution too important to be allowed to fall, you start seeing it everywhere. You saw it with the banks in 2008. The ones who lit the fire were handed a bucket of money and a soft place to land, while ordinary people lost their homes and got nothing. We even have a polite little phrase for the arrangement. We say a thing is too big to fail. We say it now like it's a fact of weather, something that just exists. But stop and hear what those 4 words actually confess. They admit we have built institutions so large they've climbed above the one force that disciplines the rest of us. Gravity. The plain law that says if you fail badly enough, you fall. Boeing climbed above gravity. Not in the air, on the ground, in the boardroom, in Washington. It made itself into something the country could not afford to lose. And then it behaved exactly the way anything behaves once it knows it will always, always be caught. Which leaves the one question I can't put down, the quiet one underneath all of it. If a company learns it will be saved no matter what it does, the plane can fall, the bolts can vanish, the losses can climb to the sky, and the rescue still comes, then what exactly is left to make it careful? What makes anyone careful when nothing can touch them? Hold on to that, because it leads us to the last place this story goes. And it's not the place you think.
Let me take you back to where we started. 16,000 feet over Oregon. A hole in the side of an aeroplane. 4 bolts that were never there. When we began, that looked like a story about one bad night. One tired worker. One panel that failed. And I told you the instinct to ask who screwed up was the wrong instinct. Now you know why. Those 4 bolts were never really about a factory floor in Washington. They were the last link in a chain that runs back 27 years. to a merger where a dying company reached up and took the controls, to a room where family became team, to a glass tower 2,000 miles from the wing, where the aeroplane became a number on a screen, to $43 billion that could have built something new and safe, and instead just lifted a stock price, to a silent piece of software the pilots were never told about, to 346 people who trusted a name that had already stopped meaning what they thought it meant, and to a man named John Barnett, because he saw it. Years before that door ever opened, he stood on that factory floor and watched the thing I've just described to you happen in real time. The care draining out, the pressure rising, the bolts that don't get checked. He said it out loud. He put it on the record. And it cost him everything. Right up to the last morning of his life. He gave that company 32 years. And in the end, they asked him a simple question. Would you fly on it? And the honest answer, from the man who knew the most, was no. He wasn't paranoid. He was early. That's the difference. He was standing at the beginning of the chain, pointing at the far end of it, telling us exactly where it led. And almost no one listened until the sky opened up over Oregon and showed us the empty holes he'd been describing for years. The bolts didn't go missing in 2024. They'd been going missing for a very long time. We just couldn't see it yet. And here's the part I want to leave with you. The part that isn't really about Boeing at all. We tell ourselves that the worst things happen because bad people do them. It's a comforting idea when you think about it. If the problem is a villain, then you find the villain, you remove the villain, and the world is safe again. But there was no villain in that tower. There were smart, respectable people following good incentives, making responsible decisions, each one reasonable on its own. And at the end of all those reasonable decisions were 2 smoking holes in the ground and a door lying in an Oregon backyard. That should frighten you more than any villain ever could. Because a villain you can catch, a system you have to live inside. And the last thing, the thing I can't quite put down. We built something too big to fail, and in doing that, without ever quite meaning to, we took away the one thing that keeps any of us honest, the fool, the consequence, the plain gravity that tells a person, or a company, or a country, be careful, because this can actually cost you. Take that away, and you don't get freedom. You get a company that forgets the bolts, because deep down, in a place no one says out loud, it has learned that it will be caught no matter what. So the real question was never what happened to Boeing. The real question is the one John Barnett was answering, in his own way, for years before any of us were paying attention. And I want you to carry it out of here with you, because it's bigger than any aeroplane. What makes you careful when nothing can touch you? Sit with that one tonight. If this landed somewhere real for you, if you feel a little differently about that name on the side of the plane than you did 30 minutes ago, then do one thing for me. Share this with 5 people, not for the algorithm, because the way these machines keep working is that most of us never look underneath them, and every person who does look is one more person who's a little harder to fool. Then leave me a comment. Not a nice one, an honest one. Tell me where you've seen this same pattern in your own life. The company, the institution, the thing that got too big to be held accountable. I read them. That's not a line. I read them. And tell me what you want us to take apart next. There's another one of these hiding behind a name you trust right now. You already have a guess which one. Tell me, and we'll go find the bolts together.